Here's the psychological truth that will change how you see every betrayal in your life. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the people you trusted most suddenly turned against you without warning, and more importantly, why this pattern keeps repeating no matter how good your intentions are. Carl Jung discovered something disturbing about human nature that explains why your success makes others want to destroy you. He found that most people will sabotage someone else's growth rather than face their own stagnation. When you start winning, when you start healing, when you start setting boundaries, you become a living reminder of everything they've refused to become. Think about it. The moment you started improving your life, relationships that felt solid for years suddenly became hostile. Friends who used to support you began making snide comments. Family members who once praised you started finding fault with everything you do. Colleagues who seemed friendly began undermining you behind your back. This isn't coincidence. This isn't bad luck. This is a predictable psychological response that Jung mapped out decades ago. But here's what Jung observed that will shock you about this silent war being waged against your transformation. According to Jung, the moment you stop playing the role others assigned you, you trigger what he called projection. They start projecting their own failures, their own fear of change, their own self-hatred directly onto you. You're not being hated for who you've become. You're being hated for who they've refused to become. Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But most people aren't ready for that level of honesty. So instead of looking inward, they attack outward. They attack you. Here's what makes this so devastating. You probably spent months or even years trying to figure out what you did wrong. You analyzed every conversation, questioned your own behavior, wondered if you were being too sensitive or too harsh. You might have even apologized for things you didn't do, tried to fix relationships that were never broken, just to stop the constant criticism and rejection. But the truth is, there was nothing you could have done differently. The hatred you're experiencing isn't about your actions, it's about their reactions to your growth. And here's the part that will make everything click about why this feels so personal, so coordinated, so impossible to defend against. Carl Jung discovered that every person carries a shadow self, the collection of traits and qualities they've rejected about themselves. This shadow contains everything they've been taught is unacceptable: their anger, their selfishness, their ambition, their need for recognition, their desire for freedom. When you start setting boundaries, when you stop people-pleasing, when you refuse to shrink yourself, you're integrating your shadow. You're becoming complete. You're owning the parts of yourself that others have buried. But for people still running from their shadow, your completeness becomes unbearable to witness. Let me give you specific examples. Your confidence reminds them of their insecurity. Not just any insecurity, but the specific insecurity they've spent years trying to hide. Your boundaries remind them of their inability to say no. And every time you enforce a boundary, they remember every time they failed to enforce their own. Your peace reminds them of their internal chaos, the constant anxiety and resentment they carry from years of self-abandonment. Jung observed that we despise in others what we haven't accepted in ourselves. But it goes deeper than that. We don't just despise it, we're triggered by it on a cellular level. When you walk into a room owning your power, their nervous system responds as if you're attacking them. When you speak with certainty about your values, their body responds as if you're exposing their lies. When you demonstrate self-respect, their subconscious responds as if you're highlighting their self-betrayal. This is why the hatred feels so intense, so personal, so disproportionate to whatever you actually did or said. They're not just rejecting you, they're rejecting the parts of themselves they see reflected in your growth. Your healing journey is forcing them to confront their wounds. Your success is forcing them to confront their excuses. Your authenticity is forcing them to confront their performance. But wait until you understand why your family and closest friends are often the first to turn against you. According to Carl Jung, there's a psychological process called individuation, becoming who you truly are, separate from others' expectations. Jung said this process is essential for mental health, but it's deeply threatening to everyone around you. Why? Because your individuation forces them to confront their own lack of authentic self. Think about how family systems work. Every family has unspoken rules, assigned roles, and expectations that keep the system stable. You might have been the responsible, Andre, the peacekeeper, the problem solver, or the emotional support. These roles aren't chosen by you. They're assigned based on what the family needs to function. When you stop being who they needed you to be and start being who you actually are, it shatters the illusion they built their identity around. They don't hate the real you. They hate that the real you exists at all because it proves they've been living a lie. Your mother, who always saw you as the responsible one, can't handle you setting boundaries because she built her identity around being the martyr who sacrificed for her selfless child. Your friends who bonded with you over shared complaints can't handle you finding peace because their entire relationship was built on mutual suffering. Your partner who felt superior because of your insecurities can't handle your confidence because it threatens the power dynamic they've grown comfortable with. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss. They didn't love you. They loved the function you served in their life. They loved how you made them feel about themselves. They loved the role you played in their story. When you refuse to play that role anymore, when you step out of their story and start writing your own, it feels like abandonment to them. It feels like betrayal. It feels like you're destroying something sacred, but you're not destroying anything sacred. You're destroying something that was never real in the first place. They preferred you broken because your brokenness made them feel whole. They preferred you small because your smallness made them feel big. They preferred you confused because your confusion made them feel wise. Your growth threatens the entire foundation of how they see themselves and their place in the world. The collective mobilization, Jung's most revolutionary discovery, explains why it feels like everyone turned against you at once. Jung said, "We're all connected through the collective unconscious, shared patterns that keep social systems functioning. These systems depend on conformity, on people staying in their assigned roles, on maintaining the status quo. When you break free from these patterns, when you refuse to participate in generational trauma, when you stop enabling dysfunction, you're not just changing yourself, you're threatening the entire system." Jung observed that the collective unconscious mobilizes to bring the deviant back in line. That's why it feels coordinated. That's why people who barely know you suddenly have strong opinions about your choices. That's why family members who never talked before are now united in their criticism of your transformation. The system is protecting itself from the threat of your evolution. Here's how this shows up in real life. You start therapy, and suddenly, everyone becomes an expert on why therapy is a waste of money. You set boundaries with toxic people, and suddenly everyone has an opinion about forgiveness and family loyalty. You leave a job that was destroying your mental health, and suddenly everyone becomes a career counselor, warning you about financial security. You start eating healthier, and people start commenting on how you think you're better than everyone else. You stop drinking or partying, and people start saying you've become boring. You choose solitude over toxic social situations, and people start spreading rumors that you think you're too good for them. Notice the pattern. Every positive change you make gets reframed as a negative character flaw. Every boundary you set gets reframed as selfishness. Every standard you maintain gets reframed as arrogance. This isn't personal criticism. This is systemic resistance. The collective unconscious is using every person in your orbit to pressure you back into conformity. It's using their voices to echo the same message. Who do you think you are to want something different? Who are you to break the patterns we've all accepted? Who are you to demand better when the rest of us have settled for less? Jung called this the leveling tendency, the unconscious drive to bring exceptional individuals back down to the group average. Your growth represents a threat to the group's comfort zone, so the group mobilizes to eliminate that threat. According to Carl Jung, we all wear masks, he called them personas, to navigate social situations. But most people mistake their mask for their true self. They become so identified with the performance that they forget there's a real person underneath. When you outgrow your persona, when you stop performing the character others expected, it feels like death to them. Not your death, the death of their projection. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. They're not ready for that terror, so they blame you for triggering it. Let me explain what's really happening here. Every relationship involves projections. We project onto others what we need them to be. Your parents projected their dreams onto you. Your friends projected their insecurities onto you. Your romantic partners projected their fantasies onto you. These projections become so strong that people literally cannot see you as separate from what they've projected. They see their projection and call it you. When you start acting outside of their projection, when you start making choices that don't fit their narrative, when you start expressing parts of yourself they never knew existed, it creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. They have two choices: update their projection to match who you actually are, or attack you for not matching their projection. Updating the projection requires admitting they never really knew you. It requires acknowledging that their entire relationship with you was based on a fantasy. It requires accepting that they fell in love with, befriended, or built their identity around someone who wasn't real. Most people can't handle that level of self-awareness, so they choose the second option. They attack you for not being who they projected you to be. Your authentic self is evidence that their performed self is a lie. Your courage to be real exposes their cowardice to stay fake. This is why they call you selfish for having boundaries, difficult for having standards, changed for having growth. The words they use to describe your transformation reveal their own insecurities. When they call you selfish, they're revealing their own fear of being seen as selfish. When they call you difficult, they're revealing their own fear of being seen as difficult. They need you to stay small so they can stay comfortable. They need you to stay broken so they can stay safe. They need you to stay in their projection so they can avoid the terror of accepting themselves completely. Here's Jung's insight that explains why your growth makes people so uncomfortable, and can't even articulate why. Jung discovered that psychological growth happens through what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces until a new level of consciousness emerges. When you can be both loving and boundaried, both empathetic and selective, both open and discerning, you've accessed something most people can't comprehend. This transcendent consciousness is what makes you dangerous to their limited worldview. Most people live in what Jung called either-or thinking. You're either nice or mean, either generous or selfish, either loyal or disloyal, either with them or against them. This binary thinking keeps them trapped in cycles of drama and dysfunction. Because they cannot integrate opposing qualities, you're no longer predictable because you're no longer operating from unconscious patterns. You can love someone and still hold them accountable. You can be generous and still protect your resources. You can be loyal and still choose yourself when necessary. People are comfortable with others who are consistently weak or consistently aggressive because they can predict and manipulate those patterns. The weak person will always give in. The aggressive person will always fight. Both responses are predictable and therefore manageable. But someone who can be soft when it serves them and strong when necessary, someone who can love without losing themselves, someone who can be present without being available. That level of psychological freedom is terrifying to those still caught in binary thinking. Jung also discovered that we all have both masculine and feminine psychological traits, but society forces us to suppress one side. The masculine includes traits like assertiveness, independence, and logical thinking. The feminine includes traits like intuition, empathy, and emotional intelligence. When you start integrating both aspects, becoming both compassionate and strong, both nurturing and assertive, both receptive and decisive, it threatens people who are still splitting these qualities. Men who have suppressed their feminine side will be threatened by your emotional intelligence. Women who have suppressed their masculine side will be threatened by your assertiveness. People who have split themselves in half to fit social expectations cannot handle witnessing someone who has become whole. Your wholeness makes their fragmentation obvious. They attack the very qualities in you that they've forbidden in themselves. But here's what makes you truly dangerous to their worldview. You've learned to think paradoxically. You understand that two seemingly opposite things can both be true. You can hold space for complexity in a world that demands simplicity. You understand that setting boundaries is actually the most loving thing you can do. You understand that saying no to others often means saying yes to yourself. You understand that temporary pain often leads to permanent peace. This level of psychological sophistication threatens people who are still thinking in absolutes. They need the world to be simple, predictable, and binary because complexity requires growth, and growth requires courage they don't possess. Here's what Carl Jung said that will change how you see every person who turned against you. Jung observed that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But he also warned that this privilege comes with a price, the loss of everyone who was only attached to your false self. The people who hate you now aren't responding to who you've become. They're responding to who they've refused to become. Your healing journey forces them to confront their own stagnation, and instead of using that as motivation to grow, they use it as justification to attack. But here's what Jung understood that changes everything. This process is not optional. According to Jung, individuation, becoming your authentic self, is not just a personal journey, it's a spiritual imperative. It's literally why you're here. And the hatred you're experiencing isn't evidence that you're on the wrong path. It's confirmation that you're on the only path that matters, the path back to yourself. Jung said, your task is not to seek for love, but to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. You've torn down those barriers. You've integrated your shadow. You've transcended their projections. You've refused to participate in the collective illusion. And that, according to the greatest psychologist who ever lived, is exactly why they can't stand you anymore. But here's the paradox Jung discovered. The same authenticity that makes people hate you is also what attracts the right people to you. The same boundaries that push away the wrong people create space for the right people. The same standards that eliminate toxic relationships make room for healthy ones. You're not losing people. You're losing illusions. You're not losing relationships. You're losing attachments to relationships that were never real in the first place. The version of you that people are mourning never existed. They're grieving a projection, a fantasy, a character you played to keep them comfortable. They're angry that you've stopped performing a role that was killing you to maintain. Jung called this process the death and rebirth of the self. The person you used to be had to die for the person you truly are to be born. And just like any death, there are people who will try to keep you in the grave because your resurrection threatens their commitment to staying dead. The question isn't why they hate you. The question is, are you strong enough to keep growing despite their hatred? Because according to Carl Jung, your psychological evolution depends on it. The silent war they're waging against your transformation is actually proof that your transformation is working. Every relationship you lose to your authenticity makes space for relationships that can handle your truth. Every person who can't accept your growth makes room for people who celebrate your evolution. Stay on your path. Your authentic self is worth every relationship you'll lose along the way. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more insights on psychological growth and share this with someone who needs to hear it. The journey to authentic self requires allies who understand the cost of real transformation.